All right.
All right.
Awesome.
So today, our subjects that we are starting with, and you can bring it wherever you like, but I like this subject, the question of should cake bakers be forced to bake a cake for a gay couple if they don't want to? I like this question because it touches upon religious liberty, it touches upon questions of freedom of expression, and it slices very well between the current liberalist movement that Sargon has started, and I would say the traditional libertarian and some part of the right too. And so first I'd like to go around the table and ask to everyone where do they stand on that question, and maybe give a little brief statement of principles. Why would you force a cake baker to bake a cake for a gay couple if they don't want to? Or why would you not do that? So if we start with maybe the academic agent, I believe you've made a video about this.
Yeah, so I made a video the other day called "Bake the Cake," and to me, I think this boils down to what Isaiah Berlin calls positive and negative liberty. So, positive liberty is the freedom to do something, and negative liberty is the freedom from. Like, for example, we all have the freedom from being punched in the face when we walk down the street, as an example. We all have a freedom from being kidnapped and put in a dungeon. Whereas positive liberty is basically the freedom to do any of those things. And the way I reasoned it through in that video, I basically said that it comes down to exactly the nature of the request. So if this baker does not usually for example, provide a service where he writes pro-gay messages on top of a cake, then essentially the gay couple are trying to force him they are trying to compel him to do something against his will, and they have no right to do that. So in that case, I'd rule in favor of the baker. Like, he shouldn't be made to write pro-gay messages on a cake. However, if the gay couple just want to like buy a muffin, which is just like sitting on the shelf, then the way I argued it through was they have a freedom from discrimination. So the baker in that case should just sell them. It's not interfering with anybody's negative liberty for the baker to just sell him that muffin that's sitting on the shelf. So that's the way I reasoned it through. There's a little bit of nuance in there. It depends on to make it a lot easier. Let's just say you walk into a 7-Eleven or a Walmart and you're buying a can of Coke. You take it up to the counter, and the guy behind the counter says, "No, I'm not going to serve you." Why not? Well, I just don't want to. You're black or you're gay. And I think in those circumstances, probably it's a violation of the customer's negative liberty. So I rule in favor of the customer. That's
right. I take huge issue with this, but we'll hear other people around first. V, what is your position on the bake the cake stuff?
Yeah, so forcing someone to bake a cake and write something on it, not only does it violate his liberty because he is forced to do something he doesn't want, it also violates the freedom of creativity, because he is now creating something, like he is writing something that he disagrees with. And then you can basically go to a gay wedding and say, yeah, look, this bakery, which is a Christian bakery, is in favor of gay marriage. And that's absolutely disgusting and shouldn't exist in a free society.
But you do think that the person should be compelled to sell the cake if it's already prepared?
So this is a very interesting issue you brought up. I will bring Romania because it's a contemporary issue that's happening here. Romania is a majority white country, but we do have ethnical Hungarians who live in Romania, in Transylvania, and they are a majority in certain towns and refuse to sell products to Romanians. This is in order to get Romanians to live from those towns, and eventually they will want to advocate for independence, which is against the Romanian constitution. And it's going to end up with violence, as probably you're going to see a similar situation which happened in Spain with the Spanish police beating the living shit out of the Catalonians, right? I think, you know what, fuck it. People shouldn't sell if they don't want to. And if they're going to end up with the police beating the living shit out of them because they're breaking the constitution, that's their choice. So yeah, I think that you should give the baker, or the person in the store, the decision to sell or not. Now,
Okay.
the moment you say this, you also need to understand that, for instance, a person can also choose not to sell to a racist, which means that the bank might choose not to give money to a racist. A landowner might choose to kick a racist out of their homes, so on and so forth. So if you don't want the standard that if you're open to the public, you should sell to the public, period, then you're opening the door for also this type of discrimination that you can see in America, basically on ideological thought. It's like you're a racist, you're not going to get service. You're the daily stormer. And I know the people are saying, well, they can go to another shop. Well, yeah, they can, but what if all the shops don't want to deal business with the racist? But for the record, I'm in favor. I think the free market eventually will fix it. So yeah.
All right, impressive position here by V. We have a libertarian V coming to a different conclusion than the academic agent, who's our right-wing speaker. What a surprising night. Todd Lewis, what do you think about the gay bake the cake compelling?
Well, I would argue, I think I would be in agreement with so far with the academic agent and V in the sense that you shouldn't compel someone to bake the cake if they don't want to. I mean, really, what this bake the cake is really a concerted quasi-Marxist attack on Christians. Nobody pulls these bake the cake stunts on Muslim bakers or Sikh bakers, which there are plenty in this country. They don't pull those stunts on those people. It's more of a directed attack on a certain religious group in this country. But the other context is that it's not really. I would agree with the libertarian consensus up to the point that you shouldn't be able to compel people to serve you if you don't want them to. What's interesting here is the question that's being brought up is, what if somebody gets fully locked out of society? Because nobody wants to trade with them. Nobody wants to sell them anything. I mean, to some extent, we already have that now, right? These people are called criminals. And if they're not criminals, in earlier times, we had people that were sort of like outlaws. They were outside the laws of the society. So we're really dealing with a question of who's in the society and who's out of the society. So I think we would all agree that some people just don't get served and some people do. The question is how are these lines drawn, and that's where I would probably object more with V and academic agent on this point.
All right, we have one more libertarian on the question. The academic agent is looking more and more isolated. In fact, I'm thinking about putting a little star on his icon so that he can be recognized as the communist that he is. And finally, I'd like to hear Greg Johnson on the issue. You've been talking a lot about race, about a form of freedom of association, in fact, between people of the same race. And it's interesting to hear you on this particular subject, which does not involve race, but could, because the discrimination and stance against gay people could also be reproduced in a context where people would like to serve people of a certain race or not serve people of another race. So what would be your position on this, Greg?
I think with most businesses, businessmen should simply have the right to refuse service to anyone. But there are certain qualifications that I would put on that. Really, the major qualification is if the person can go somewhere else, if there are alternatives, then no businessman should be compelled to serve anybody. And they can have any reason they want. You show up with no shirt on or no shoes on, they have the right to serve you. You show up filthy with a cloud of flies around you, they don't have to admit you to their restaurant. Things like that. I think that most businesses should simply be able to do that, and it's a matter of discretion, and there should be no problem with that. And I think that's actually a way of maintaining basic civilized social standards in a society. Now, if though we're dealing with a situation where there are no alternatives, that becomes problematic, because what's happening is, in effect, a person is being excluded from society as a whole. And that is not a decision that I think a business, a private institution, should be allowed to make without any kind of oversight from the collective, from the state, from representatives of the collective interests. And so if we're dealing with something like a natural monopoly, if you're an anarchist and the power company doesn't like your politics and they want you to freeze in the winter, that should not be allowed. If
I really like.
Yeah, if there is.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, if there is basically one useful platform for buying and selling books like Amazon.com, and they decide they don't like selling your books, they should not be allowed to do that. So I believe that things like Facebook, Twitter, utility companies, anything where there is a natural monopoly and where a business saying, we simply elect not to do business with these people, it's our sovereign right, in effect excludes people from society as a whole, that should not be permitted. So I am absolutely for regulating the major platforms, PayPal, Amazon.com, Twitter, Facebook, all of them, when they try and exercise ideological censorship and discrimination. Also, I'd go beyond that. I would say that we should have legislation in America that bans outright any politically correct terms of service or employment. So Google would not be able to run their totalitarian social experiments. It would simply be against the law for them to even breathe a word of the kind of nonsense that that's now come out with this James Damora lawsuit. So that's my basic position on it. In terms of small businesses where there are alternatives, I think that there should be a great deal of discretion. In terms of big businesses and monopolistic type businesses, no. The public interest requires that these be regulated to basically permit all people to use their services who can actually pay.
I really like this grounding in antitrust law rather than academic agent who seems to be grounding his thinking in positive versus negative rights, and we'll get back to it. Now, someone on the chat reminds me, academic agent is not a communist because communists do not have cakes. And so I'm sorry for calling him a communist. He's a somewhat left-wing capitalistic thinker.
Hold on, he can be the leader of a communist nation and they have cakes?
Academic agent. It seems to me that when we offer freedom to people, it is both negative and positive in nature. If I have the freedom to choose my healthcare, not only do I have the freedom to choose between different hospitals, but I have the freedom to decide that I do not want to go to a hospital too. Freedom is not freedom if you only limit it to the positive or negative domain. And in the same way, I, as a YouTube creator, I'm not forced to bake a cake for gay people. And in fact, if I make a cake for myself or I make a cake for some people in my family, I'm not forced to offer it to the whole public. So how do you ground your thinking here, knowing that there's lots of people who make cakes and they're not forced to give it to whoever the state decides they should give it to?
There's a couple of little nuances here that I need to talk about. And it's funny you mentioned antitrust, because I am against antitrust laws, kind of controversially. So all of this is based on this idea that when you go into a shop, you are effectively entering into a trade, okay, with the shopkeeper. Now, this works in a scenario like, let's say if you went to the bazaars of Iran, like a place like Isfahan, where they've got real live bazaars, and you go in, you want to buy like a copper pot or something, and it's literally like the scene from Aladdin, where he's trying to buy something and they barter over it. I'll give you 2 for this. No, I want 3. Okay, I'll give you 2.5. No, I'll walk away. Or no, I'm not going to do the deal. Okay, and in that scenario, of course, you can see very clearly where the limits are on service. Nobody should be forced to sell anything they don't want to. But in the real world, especially in the West, when a business puts a sign on the door saying open for business, it is implied in that sign that we are open for business and that we are willing to trade all of these items that are on the shelf for these set prices, because we don't do this bartering most of the time in the West. You all agree, right? You don't go to Walmart and say, actually, I'll give you like 50p for that. I'll give you 50 cents for the can of Coke instead of $1 or whatever it is. Okay. So I'm talking about the scenario where somebody has walked into a shop, they've picked an item up from the shelf after seeing the "we are open and willing to do business" sign. They have put it on the counter. At that point, if the person behind the counter says, "Yeah, no, I'm just not going to do this deal. I just don't like the look of you," I'm not sure if we could have a society where that was allowed to happen. Now, if we had a different scenario, let's think about some businesses that do this all the time, like nightclubs, okay, with bouncers on the door, with security guards on the door. Now, so nightclubs do this all the time. They will, in fact, the criteria could be like, well, the security guard likes the look of the pretty girl, so she comes in, and the big fat guy, he's just going to be in the queue all night, right? We've all seen that scenario. Now, that is absolutely fine because it's happening before they've stepped in the door. But once you're already in, I think it's unfair to expect the person to give the person on the counter the power to say, "No, I'm not going to serve you after you've walked through the door." You'd have to put a sign up saying, "We do not serve these sorts of people in this store," and make it really, really clear up front. And if you wanted to do that and go back to the days of like segregation, so be it. You know, I'm not going to force anyone not to do it. But I think once you're already in, it's fair game to serve that person then.
So it's
otherwise you'd have chaos. Otherwise you'd have chaos, right? You'd have people randomly refusing service all over the shop. So
there's something that I'd like to add here. Well, one of the fault lines that's going to happen here is the nature of freedom. Now, V and you, academic agent, and even many on the left have this argument between positive and negative liberty. Negative liberty is, people don't do things to you without your consent. Positive liberty is you're obligated to do things for other people. Well, what I would argue is that the problem that I see with this is that it's a conception of liberty that is rooted, that is not true to, or at least true to our lived experiences and to the sort of intellectual tradition of the West. Historically, beginning with Aristotle and going all the way through Christendom, is that liberty, properly understood, is being able to act within accordance to one's nature. And one was free when one acted in accordance with one's nature. So the laws, that was the whole debate of what the good state was. So whether it was Aristotle's The Republic, Plato's The Republic, or Aristotle's The Politics, or Cicero's The Republic, the question is, what are the kinds of legal regimes we can set up that would reward virtuous behavior, penalize vicious behavior, and narrow the range of human action such that human flourishing, maximizing actions are given the greatest possible scope rather than vicious actions, whereas negative liberty would seem to indicate that we should just expand individual choice as far as we can, as long as that individual choice doesn't directly or indirectly harm somebody else. And we can get to the harm principle there, but I think also the definition of harm is somewhat flawed.
Okay, but what was your criticism?
Well, that was the criticism. I mean, this is a notion of liberty that is sort of not true to lived experiences and to how Westerners have viewed liberty since at least the ancient Greeks.
So can you give me an example of liberty that you don't like?
Maximizing individual choice is not the prerequisite for liberty. It's just
give me something concrete. Like what
would be the kind of liberty that I would like? Well,
no,
for
that
instance,
you wouldn't like. No. So give me a choice that an individual makes that you don't think it should be up to them.
Well, for instance, I think certain sexual preferences should be up to individual choice.
So what would happen with the gapers?
That's really, there's a lot. Well, let's put it this way: in the United States, sodomy was outlawed in all 50 states, and nobody was too upset about it. Society worked pretty fine. No totalitarian coon squads, just America as usual, apple pie.